Hello and welcome to the Audio Apprentice, and today we'll be looking at how gates and expanders work, where to use them and how to apply them. A gate in audio acts and works as a gate on a fence does. It opens and closes. You can open it quickly, close it quickly or slowly, hold it open for a long time or close it quickly after you open it. A gate usually is used on live drums to exclude spill from other parts of the kit, such as removing the snare from a kick track, or a hi-hat from a tom track, or a snare track, cymbals from tom tracks, etc. They can also be used to tighten up guitars during short accented hits, or remove amp noise. They can also be used to tighten up bass guitars to give it a little bit more punch, as we'll see a little bit later. They can even be used to shorten notes, such as a kick that sounds great but is too long. They can also be used to remove any extraneous noise quickly rather than edit each space. Another function is the expander, which is not as harsh as a gate. It can be used to push low-level spill downwards and give you a clearer sound. It can also be used to make some sounds more prominent, as we'll see later. I've set up a stock standard Pro Tools gate, a Dyne 3 expander gate. You may think that because it's a stock standard plugin, that the quality won't be any good, but it has everything that a lot of other gates don't have. I've set up the gate beforehand so you can see how different parameters work. A gate should be before EQ. That is because any time you adjust the EQ, you may have to adjust the gate after, and you'll need to readjust the gate so it opens and closes at the right time. So here I've set up a live snare track and our Dyne 3 expander gate. Now I'll just mute the gate and let's have a listen to the track on its own. In the snare track, we heard cymbals, toms, hi-hats and kick. Now we'll unmute the gate and we can hear the effect of the gate, and then we'll adjust the parameters to see how it affects the sound. That was the gated snare. We didn't hear any kick, cymbals or toms. We did hear the hi-hat going along with the snare, but that's about all. Now, let's go through the parameters. First is the threshold. Then we've got the attack, the hold, release, ratio, and finally there's the range for the expander gate. A gated snare, kick or toms can also help in replacing or adding a sample. You can check this out in our video on replacing sounds in a loop. Now let's have a look at the threshold. The threshold is the point where the gate will open and close. You can see that as I increase and decrease the threshold, this line will move, and you'll be able to see how far back or forward it is from the actual hit. I'll start play and then move the threshold up and down. I've just reset the threshold, but as you heard, as we increased the threshold, less of the snare came through, and as we decreased the threshold, more of the snare was heard. The next parameter is the attack. It's set to the lowest at 10 microseconds. You can see the U symbol. This means millionths of a second and is pronounced mu. Now, let's have a look at the snare wave's attack. I've brought this down right to the sample level. you can see that from the initial response to the peak is 1 millisecond or 10 microseconds. So it's just within the range of the attack. But here we have the look ahead function. The look ahead function anticipates what's coming up and is ready to function. As we play the track and adjust the attack, you will hear that the transient disappears and tends to soften the sound. There's nothing wrong with using this as an effect to soften a snare sound or delaying the attack and replacing the start with another sample to give it a better attack. So I've taken it back and ready to adjust the attack. The next parameter is the hold. Think of this as opening a farm gate and keeping it open to let more sheep through. The longer the hold, the more sheep. Here again, I'll adjust the parameter and you can hear the difference. I've just reset. You've heard that the longer the hold time, the more snare came through. The shorter the hold time, the less snare was heard. Next is the release time. With the release time, it's basically how quickly you shut the gate after your initial hold. So let's have a listen to how it's affecting the snare. If you paid attention, you would have heard that the hold time was consistent all the way through that, and the difference was the very tail of the snare. With the longer release time, you heard a little bit more of the tail of the snare. With the shorter release time, it was a bit more abrupt. With our threshold, hold, release, and attack parameters back to where we started from, it's time to have a look at the ratio. The ratio affects how hard the gain reduction is applied when it's below the threshold. A simple gate's usually set to about 100 to 1 and is very severe. A ratio of 2 to 1 is far gentler and could be used in conjunction with an expander. You can see it in the sloping line here. You heard as we decreased the ratio, the gating wasn't as severe. So now we come to the expander section. Here I've got a ride, kick and snare. The ride's a little bit prominent and I want to push that down. I've got the range down at -3.6 dB, a ratio at 2 to 1, and the attack is not as quick as you had it in the gate, so it lets a little bit more of the transient through, and the release and the hold are reasonably quick. The threshold is set to just get triggered at the kick and snare. So I've set it up so the kick and the snare are just above the threshold and pushing the ride cymbal down. Let's have a listen as I bypass it. Now you can use this, say, on a vocal track that's got perhaps a little bit of bleed in it. You can use it on a snare track to push down the ghost notes a little bit if they're too loud. And as you've seen in the drum track, you can use it to give it a bit more pulse by pushing everything down and just letting the kick and the snare come through. The final part of the gates is the EQ section. Not all gates have this, but with the addition of an extra EQ before the gate, you can achieve the same. Watch the replacing drum samples video to see how. Okay, sometimes in a track you may have a lot of bottom end, say in a kick, or the high end of a hat bleeding into, say, a snare track. This makes it difficult to gate the track, because if there's a lot of bottom end and top end, say in that snare track, the gate tends to react to the bottom end and the top end first. By applying a high pass filter or both, you can home in just on the snare. You heard that as we moved the filters, it only reacted to that particular part of the frequency. Once it went past that frequency, say, of the snare, where it was triggered, nothing happened. There was no triggering. So basically you can hone in just on the snare frequencies and get that to trigger. If you were listening, you heard how they affected the gate. The only audio that is passing through now is between 400 Hz and 3 kHz. Anything outside those frequencies doesn't get triggered. Now you've seen how we used gates and expanders on a kit. Now let's have a look at instruments and what we can do with gates on instruments. Now gates aren't just used for drums. You can use them on a bass guitar to give more definition, tightness and punch. We've set one up and we'll be showing you the parameters and their effects. Now, let's listen to the bass without the gate, and I'll switch in the gate as we go along. So you heard that when we applied the gate, the notes were well defined. There's a little more space between the notes, and if you wanted a little bit more attack, all you need to do is just reduce the attack. Let's put a little more attack into that. By reducing the attack, you heard that the notes had a little bit more attack. The next use for gates was really big in the 80s and to some extent in the 90s, and that's the gated reverb. I've got my snare track, which I've gated, and to that I've added an auxiliary track, which I've put a convolution reverb onto it, and I've also added a gate to it. So now all we need to do is send our gated snare to our reverb track, apply our convolution reverb, and apply our gate. And this is what we have. And there we have gated reverb. I hope you enjoyed the video on gating and its possibilities, and hopefully we'll see you again. Bye for now.